everyone, this is Craig Zingerline. I'm going to talk to you today about how high growth startups leverage experimentation to prioritize their product roadmap. And we're going to just get right into it. So here we go. All right, so the way products and features are typically built works something like this. You've got an amazing idea, or somebody in your company does, and you think this feature is really going to move the needle. So you put it in the product backlog and you get to work building. So you think it's only going to take 3 sprints. We build, let's go. And you figure, hey, we're going to launch this thing. We're going to rake it in. And you go live. So 1 month later, though, you realize, okay, well, maybe that didn't work so well. I think we need to build one more thing. So you've got this amazing idea. You said, this update's really going to move the needle now. So you put it back in the backlog. This time it's only going to take 2 more sprints. So you get to work, you build, and you think, hey, I'm going to launch and we're going to rake it in this time. And what ends up happening is usually disappointment or failure. And so during this talk, I'm going to walk you through some of the ways that we can get better at building features. And we're going to talk about how to build experimentation right into your product roadmap, right alongside your core product development work. All right, so this is a screenshot of your typical product development lifecycle. So you see it starts with the product backlog and your sprint backlog, and then you kind of move into your sprint. Sprints are generally 1 or 2 weeks, maybe up to 30 days. I think most Scrum teams work with a 2-week sprint cadence, and then you have a release. The challenge here is that you're working often with unvetted features and unvetted ideas, and so why does this actually matter? Well, because most startups fail, and usually not because of bad products, but most startups fail because of unvetted features, poor marketing, and other market-related issues. And the numbers are pretty sobering. So we'll take a look. So in 2018, CB Insights, which is kind of a publisher of data, did a post-mortem. They interviewed 101 different startups on why they failed. And these are the reasons. So there's not a lot with product here. So product without a business model, but that's not pure product. Product mistimed. There's really not a lot about bad features or we built the wrong thing. Paul Graham in 2006 had a really interesting essay on 18 mistakes that kill startups. And I'll pause on this for a second. So again, there's a whole bunch of issues here, but not a lot around just the product being bad, right? So this is important because 74% of failures in startup land have something to do with growth, or put differently, it's really not about the product. It's more about your features and timing. And we'll dig into that in this lesson here. So how do we go about actually changing this? Well, doing the right thing means ensuring that the right thing is built at the right time. And you want to make sure that the metrics and measurement for whatever you're building are tied right into that feature and product development. And you really have a lot of ownership over those metrics as you go. You want to ensure that both sets of stakeholders, so both your customers and the business that you're working with, gain value with each release. And that's one of the core tenets of growth, is that it's not just about the customer and it's not just about growing your business. It's actually a healthy balance between building a strong business and keeping your customers very happy. You have to do both at the same time. And you'll also want to focus on making sure that experimentation and rapid iterations are starting to get sprinkled into your core product development. So what is your team supposed to do here? I would urge you to think about the process and the approach that you're going through when you're approaching this. So we've come up with an experiment-based feature roadmap methodology that I'll share with you here. So number one is that you validate the need for the feature first with real users, ideally something that's out in the wild that you're actually getting real feedback from. But you can start really, really simple. So get something basic out early and then iterate really rapidly, really quickly. Leverage feedback from the start. So it doesn't really matter what you're building. If you're getting customer feedback and buyer feedback from real users, you're going to start to learn much more rapidly, and you're not just going to trust your gut or your executive team who says, hey, we need to build these 5 things. And this really starts by using a hypothesis-driven approach. And I'll show you kind of what that means in a second here. So when you're working with more of an experimentation methodology with your product roadmap, you want to build your hypothesis. So for each and every experiment that you're going to be running, or each and every feature that you're going to be building or plan to build, you really should build this hypothesis. And it goes something like this. By doing or not doing something, we believe that another thing will be impacted by something, right? And so basically you can use this framework to fill in the blanks. Another thing you're going to want to do is align your product managers really closely with marketing. And so at the product level, there's a bunch of questions that you're going to want to ask yourself. So why do we need this feature that we're building? Who benefits from this feature that we're building? What might this actually detract from? So it's not uncommon for features to be continuously deployed and rolled out, and then utilization across those features or other features starts to tank. And this leaves a lot of product managers and marketing teams kind of scratching their head. Like, we thought we're just doing the right thing by continuously building. But the unintended consequence of rapid feature development is, if it's not been vetted, is that there might be a detraction on some other part of your business model or within your product funnel. You'll also want to ask, what's the goal with this release? So what tangibly do we actually want to get done by putting this out there? Just building stuff to stay busy is a really poor excuse for how to run a startup. So you really want to have a goal behind each and everything that you're doing, and ideally back that up with a little bit of data. How are you going to measure the success or failure of what you're building, right? So that gets back to the previous point. So if you can't measure what you're putting out there, then it's really, really hard to objectively tell whether or not what you're building is actually the right thing. And what's the simplest way we can validate this idea? So I'll walk you next through kind of the ways that you can actually go about launching features in the wild. But really, you need to get in this mindset of really lean, starting small for most of the things. Maybe at an enterprise SaaS platform where you're 5 years in the market, you have to go much broader and much deeper with your feature set. But for pre-product market fit or for growth stage startups, really a lot of times the more simplistically you can deliver something, the faster your feedback cycles are going to be. And this is really important. So be mindful of other work that the feature development that you're working on is gonna develop. So outside of just the product view, here's some questions. What and who do I need to support this feature? So again, it's not going to just be the product team, or maybe not the marketing team. What other teams does this thing that you're putting out there impact? And what detractors are you going to come up with because of this release? Do I need to write content, emails, drip campaigns? How are you effectively, again, going to support this from a channel perspective? What other parts of the marketing funnel does this feature change? Does this change how you go to market? Does it change how you do activation? You really have to think through kind of this holistically, instead of just putting things out there that you don't really understand how they're going to impact the work of other people. How are users going to learn about this feature? And then what happens if this rollout fails? Do you have the discipline to actually roll back? Do you have the measurement and tooling in place so that when you put a feature out there and it totally tanks, or it kills your revenue streams, or it tanks your conversion rates, do you have the discipline to roll it back? So when we look at this kind of from a growth-led product development standpoint with experimentation at the core, there's a few ways that we can kind of move forward. And I talk a lot about what I call the step functions of growth. And so if you think about growth and feature and product development in terms of these step functions, really at the start, you've got nothing, and then you're moving to something. So you don't have a feature, and then you have a feature. You don't have an idea, then you have an idea. And so the way that you want to think about this process when looking at experimentation within your startup is that you go from 0, and then 0 to 1, and then 1 to 10, 10 to 100, and then you move into this optimization land. And so the 0 to 1 step function is really when you're at the starting point of an experiment, and you're starting with something small, and you're probably doing a bunch of manual work to validate that feature, right? So instead of spending those 2 weeks building something out, spend a couple hours planning out how you're going to get feedback on that future iteration of whatever you plan to build, and put it out there in the wild. The next iteration gets a little bit more scientific, it's a little bit bigger, maybe you do a little bit of work there. The next iteration, that 10 to 100, is when you start to scale based on this feature. And here you may get team buy-in, and the idea that you have turns into a real feature that you build, and then you move into optimization. So I'm going to walk you through each level of this with a real example in a second. So this is an example that I'll walk you through with my current company, Sandbox. And Sandbox is a B2C platform that lets supporters of the military members who are about to go through boot camp, it enables the supporters to write letters via our platform. And they can do that a lot more cost effectively than physically writing a letter and overnighting it to the recruit. So we solve a huge pain point for that intersection of civilian and military life. And so we monetize via this digital physical product. So we had this hypothesis that said by leveraging discounts for some of our existing customers, we thought that we could increase revenue for a test cohort compared to our control. And I'll walk you through all these numbers in a second. So the feature development planning that we thought through was, okay, well, most of the time, the instantiation of how we're going to go about testing our hypothesis is by building out a promo code system. But that was going to take multiple sprints. So we thought, okay, well, what can we do to actually speed up the delivery cycle so that we can get something into the wild and get feedback before we go spend a whole bunch of time building something? So we thought that promo codes could work or discounts could work, but we didn't know for sure. Again, this was our hypothesis. And so we said, okay, let's do as little work as possible to validate this. And then we can iterate as we go, only building features when needed. So for this set of experiments, we really held ourselves accountable for not just getting into the build mindset, but getting into the test and experiment mindset. And so when we started moving to execution, what we realized was we actually had to build something small. So we had to build basically a piece of code to enable some of the users within our cohort to see a discounted price. So when users come in, we'll have a control group that sees our standard pricing. And then we were able to put a certain cohort of users into a test group that just saw one discount on one of our products. And so that was our starting point. So we didn't build this huge promo code system. We literally just built as minimum of a feature as possible, and we got it out there. So we developed that quickly, we deployed it, we launched it, and then we ran the step function 0 to 1 test. So again, we had never done anything with discounts. Now we move into execution mode. And so then we said, okay, well, once we get this out there, we'll measure the results and we'll look at next steps. So here's what it looked like. So we manually picked a small cohort of people. We put them into this test group. This group saw a discount in our product. And we also ran messaging campaigns to the cohort that was going to see this discount, trying to drive more awareness of the campaign. So we had marketing capabilities already that allow us to basically reach different cohorts or different sets of users that are in our funnel. And in this particular case, we said, okay, well, we're going to do a little bit of messaging to tell them about this discount. We're going to show them that, and we're also going to show it in the product. Everybody else, the 95% of people in the control, didn't even have any idea that this was happening. So at this point, statistical significance really was not what we were looking for. We wanted some directional signal that said, hey, this discount either kind of works or doesn't work, or maybe we'll learn something from it. And so this is kind of where we're at in the step functions growth at 0 to 1. So when we established the test, we had to look at it from a data standpoint. And so we established what we call our control, which is basically the baseline that we started this experiment at. So historically, when we looked at the prior 30 days of numbers of letters purchased, which is kind of what we sell in our product, our control group had 70% of users buying a single letter, 18% buying 3, and then 11% buying another bundle that we had. And so that was our starting point. And so our first test, when we put this out manually, we decided to discount our 3-letter bundle. And so you can see here that we were able to increase the percentage of people that purchased that 3-letter bundle, and we decreased the percentage of people that purchased 1. But because of the purchase mix, for whatever reason, our revenue was actually lower than the control. So our first experiment was a failure. So we went back, we changed our messaging a little bit. We kind of changed a little bit of just how we thought about the test. And mostly that came in the form of very simple message changes. We didn't touch the code base at all. And when we sent marketing messages out to the users, we basically we're highlighting different value points. We failed again though. And so, we did a better job actually of getting people to spend up funnel with us, but the revenue compared to the control was down even worse than the first test. So we took a pause and we said, okay, well, what did we learn? So we ran that for 2 different weeks. We learned that, okay, we can change user behavior. Like we can actually control to that, which is kind of cool. But the changes resulted in lower overall revenue. So, that's not good. So that, we're a very revenue focused business. Test 1 and 2 are failures. But we thought, well, there's something there, because we could change that user behavior and you could see it in the numbers. We thought maybe we'll just make some new plans and we'll revisit our hypothesis and kind of rebuild the hypothesis a little bit. We did no change to the product, right? So now we're heading into our next iteration of experiments, and it's messaging only. This is still owned by marketing. There's no product change at this point at all. And this is really critical because I think when you start to see failure with your experiments, a lot of people either give up or they'll decide to go back and build more stuff. And in our case, we were really true to our methodology, which was we're not going to change anything in terms of the product until we've really exhausted all other methods. Let the engineering team focus on higher value things than potentially failing with these tests. So we didn't make any changes. So what we ended up doing is we thought about that 0 to 1 and decided to test discounts on a different type of purchase. So we looked at our single letter purchase, which is our highest seller. And at this point we said, okay, well, let's maybe pull in some more folks to get their thoughts on how we should actually run and execute this experiment. So here in this 1 to 10 step function, if you've got a data analyst or a data science team, this is a great time to pull them in. You're getting a little bit more formal, a little bit more scientific. If you've got a design team, maybe add some design polish. You're probably going to open this up to a bigger cohort of users. So the stakes go up a little bit. And, so whereas the 0 to 1 game, it's really supposed to be low risk, kind of lo-fi, just pure experimentation. The 1 to 10 game, you're starting to bake your idea a little bit more, you're getting a little bit more sophisticated. And so you got to put a little bit more thought into it. And so here's what we look at in terms of the step function of growth. We've kind of moved up to that next iteration with this next batch of tests. And so when we started discounting that single letter, again, there was no product change here. For the first time, we saw our revenue increase. So the revenue split between our products changed in a positive way. So again, we had our hypothesis for the first time now in experiment 3, we're seeing, okay, this is starting to work. So then we went back to the drawing board and we said, okay, well, how do we start to scale this effort? And so for most organizations, when you get a positive read on your experiment and you can basically look at a win versus your control, it's probably time to move it up in terms of visibility. So this 10 to 100 step function often is where you'll get this in front of 50% or 80% of your audience, maybe not 100% yet, but you're going to be thinking of new ways to validate whatever hypothesis you might have. And that may include just getting in front of more people or trying even wackier experiments. If you fail here, and if you repeatedly fail here, it means you didn't get enough traction from the experiment. And, you probably got statistical significance saying that you're making some difference, but it's really not big enough to warrant going all in on multiple sprints worth of work on this big feature. So maybe you didn't have a great idea after all. And it's way better to kill an idea at this point when you haven't, when it's mostly just been maybe a small team working on this, instead of going and spending a month on feature development and then launching it and then failing at that point. So this is a much better place to fail. And if you succeed though, kind of like we did, then you may have a feature item or a backlog item. So for us, this actually meant looking at how do we take the data that we leverage and learned in our experiment and scale it up to everybody. And so remember, we had this original vision of building this promo code system. At this point, we decided, okay, we've got enough data now where we think we can build a new feature which will actually expand our ability to get this in front of more people and give us more features within our admin tooling of our product to run more iterations of these tests. And we thought that if we did that, since we had enough data coming in showing us that we should be successful, we decided, okay, well, now it's time to do a little bit of work. So here we're at that 10 to 100 area. And so with growth-led development here, we're looking at amazing ideas. We think, hey, this feature is really going to move the needle. We build, build, build. It's going to take 3 sprints, and we launch, we rake it in, and we have a winner. And basically that's the process that we went through. And so if you look at some of the later iterations, once we put a little bit of engineering work into the product at this point with our promo system, by the end, we were able to influence our revenue by over 24% compared to the control. So that's, 2 or 3 weeks worth of work and a whole bunch of testing before that work. But we were able to fine tune our feature development to a point where we could predict how these experiments were going to run. We can, we've got tons of data now on the cohorts, and we're really able to impact that revenue in a very, very positive way. And in a lot of ways, that's been a game changer for us. And so from there, it becomes more of an optimization game. And so it's less, build, build, build. It's more, okay, let's tweak the messaging. Let's test with different cohorts. Let's change colors and button sizes and display tactics and things like that once we kind of get this thing out into the wild at scale. And so that's what we call the optimization or always on mode. So, once you walk through the STEM functions, it's likely that you'll build your learnings into your product. So just like we did, with our promo code system, we took those learnings, we iterated, and then those became, all the updates that we put into our software. And in fact, we're still working on new iterations of that promo code module that we started so simply. And then from there, you're going to start the process over with a new set of hypotheses, and you just kind of repeat. And it's really fun. So, the takeaway though is hold yourself and your product team accountable to not build too many unvetted features, because that really is what will kill a startup. So switching gears a little bit. So when you look at road mapping growth and kind of how to get started with this stuff, really what you should be considering are 2 different streams of features that feed your product backlog. And so you saw this image down in the lower right before, where you've got your product backlog, moving to your sprint backlog, moving to your sprint, and then release. The way I look at this as a product manager is you've really got 2 streams. You've got your experiment stream, which is you've got this idea, you test, and then you build, and that becomes part of your, those ideas become part of your backlog, but they've been vetted. And then there's going to be things that or know in air quotes, you need to build, and that becomes its own stream. And so it's not uncommon for that second batch to be where most startups spend most of their time. But the high growth startups really look at that experimentation stream and leverage those learnings and lessons to primarily be the feeder of the core backlog. And I think there's always things that that you need to build. So if you're processing payments, and that's core to what you're doing as a company, and you can't process payments until you build the payment processor or do the integration, then you have to do that work. Like, those are things that you have to do. And there's always going to be some of those, or it's likely there's always going to be some of those, but the rest of it, you have to work from an experimentation standpoint if you really want to move fast and not waste time. And from there, just generate ideas and go. So you don't need full-time resources to run experiments. You don't need a full-time growth team. Everybody's got ideas. You can workshop this with your company, and you can leverage the crowd to get ideas. And we do a lot of this at Sandbox, where ideas come from everywhere. Pretty much every company where I've been at, and any gigs that I'm on, it's been really interesting to see who's coming up with ideas, and it really is cross-functional. And so you really have to embrace that and come up with a methodology and a process so that anybody in your organization can participate in that experimentation process. You also probably should have somebody functionally act as a growth lead. And so really what that means is that somebody is designated as kind of the person who's shepherding these ideas through the backlog process. And it could be your product manager, it might be a growth lead. If you've got a growth product manager, that will be this person. But it could be somebody on marketing, it could be somebody in operations. Really, it doesn't really matter, but you want somebody to basically be not really the gatekeeper, but the organizer of these ideas, and the person who kind of socializes these ideas and have them functionally act as that. And then obviously pull in these cross-functional team members, so engineering, product, et cetera, to support your efforts as you go. And Most importantly, I think it's critical for, all the high growth companies that I've worked with. Um, the executive team has really had buy-in to let the team be fairly autonomous in terms of what they're allowed to do, and enable them to take on some risk. And kind of when you free up the team, maybe you put some boundaries around what they can and can't do, or what they can and can't spend. Maybe some messaging constraints and things like that. Um, when you open that up, you really may find that you're able to move a lot faster, because people feel invigorated that they can go from their idea through execution through this process really quickly. It's super engaging. And there's a couple different frameworks to use. So there's a RICE framework that'll help you kind of get organized. So like these frameworks are really meant to help with experimentation, organization more than anything else, and to kind of put a scope to the ideas. So RICE was developed by Intercom. There's one called ICE. I've got my own version of that I call ICE with 3 E's, or you can build your own and get cross team buy-in. But this is my framework that we use, and I've used a bunch in the past. And really what it is you've got a test name and you've got your hypothesis, and then you basically come up with a score. So the higher the score, um, the better in terms of the growth test. And so you'll likely want to take the items that have a higher score and build them first, or get them into your growth testing framework first. And so if you look at this, you've got impact plus confidence, and there's a multiplier there, and then you subtract out all the efforts. So you've got engineering effort, marketing effort, and then this other effort, which is who else in the organization is going to need to support this feature that you're putting out there, or the work that's going to go into that. And then you come up with your score. And so I'll share this after and some resources, but it's been fairly handy to keep us organized. And then this is a very primitive version of a growth dashboard. I put this out here because, and this is a modified, but essentially a real screenshot of some stuff that I've done. You really need to be tracking your efforts on a weekly basis, and it doesn't have to be this perfect, mix panel or amplitude or Google's Data Studio solution, right? Like you can hack together a report that looks pretty bad like this, but actually gives you the metrics that you need on a week-to-week basis to keep yourself honest in terms of what's working or what's not. So if you're running experiments, then you have to track the results somewhere. And I would look at it on a daily basis, and I would track the metrics manually to start, so you really own your numbers. Just a few other tips to stay organized. Experiments really should be driving the key portions of your product backlog. So define your process, stay consistent with your cadence and your measurement. I've found, and I've kind of experimented, with my own companies on this model here. Like I found that weekly experiment sprints and a weekly cadence of reporting, where you're looking at Monday through Sunday data, enables you every Monday to basically look at last week, get organized for this coming week, and make whatever changes, go through the review process, and then basically decide what you need to do that next week, to do the next iteration of experiments and to work on that roadmap. And then work really, really closely. If you are not the PM, work closely with your PM to ensure that you've got alignment on all feature development. And what you don't want to do is create these two different work streams and there's conflict between the two. Like the best organizations, maybe there's a tiny bit of conflict there because you've got your stuff we know we need to build bumping up against the stuff that has been vetted. But that's healthy. I think though you really need to be aligned as a product organization to really pull this off. So get in there early with your product managers or your product team, and make sure that you've got good communication across the board so that you can support this methodology. And so that's it. I've got a bunch of resources up on my personal website. So feel free to check that out. I also have a whole bunch of stuff that I've put into a free growth curriculum online. So if you hit the bit.ly URL there, you can check that out. Feel free to email me. And I'd love to share more examples with you. So hopefully this was helpful. And thanks so much for spending some time with me today.